Everyone. I just wanted to say thanks for joining. I'm not sure why we had to do this on Google Hangout to put it onto YouTube, but anyway, that's where YouTube directed me. So the new link has been posted. So you guys should have that in the meetup group, hopefully. Hopefully you get it in time so that you can join and start asking questions. So tonight I thought we'd talk a little bit about how trauma affects our relationships, like our adult relationships in our everyday life. And not necessarily trauma in general, but unresolved trauma specifically. So as a child, usually your job, if you have lived through some type of childhood abuse or trauma, usually we take on the role of like the peacemaker or the mediator because we know that something's wrong with our caretaker, and so we try and smooth that over. We try and make everything okay so that we can feel safe. That's just part of our normal biological makeup, and that's pretty common. Sometimes we don't break out of that and we come into adulthood and we think that we still need to be the peacemaker or the mediator, so to speak. And we find ourselves getting into relationships with people. And I say relationships, I mean friendships, work relationships, coworkers, boss, neighbors, significant others, family members, etc., where we are continuing that role. We haven't really resolved that trauma, and so we continue that role of peacemaker. We get involved in a relationship or in a situation, and we feel like we need to be the one to be the middle person or to make the peace, keep the peace, so to speak. So the role of mediator is a pretty good one that most of us still kind of live into. Another one is a lot of when you're a child, you take in, our last couple of talks, we talked about the energetics of trauma and the energetics of emotion and the energetics of certain situations and emotions and feelings and thoughts and how that affects us as we grow in our developmental phases. And children can be very intuitive because they take in a lot of feelings. They're very open. They're very vulnerable. Usually the words open and vulnerable denote that there's a lot of feeling or a lot of feeling sensation, so to speak. So they kind of take everything in their environment, and then we're kind of scanning to see what's safe and what's not, and what's okay and what's not. And we sort of continue that on into adulthood too. So when we go out in public, or we go to, I don't know, we go to the store, we go to a movie theater, we go shopping, or whatever that is, we kind of scan our environment and take things in because we're so used to doing that. And then we kind of decide from there what's safe and what's not and where to go from here. And so sometimes, if you're out in a crowd of people and you're like kind of scanning the crowd, scanning that sort of collective energy, so to speak, when you get home, you're really tired, or you just don't want to be around people. You need kind of time to yourself to recharge. That's okay. But that's part of resolving your trauma, or that's a sign showing that we need to work on resolving our trauma a little bit in that area. And then another way that it can show up is that for a long time, you're so out of control. So for me personally, I felt like I was so out of control of my body and my life for so long that when I became an adult, screw everyone else, I'm in control, my way or the highway, period. Which didn't go over really well with a lot of people. A few people were okay with it, but they must have had their own issues to resolve because it's horrible to treat someone like that. But anyway, so they get very controlling, and everything has to be, and it's just an effort to make yourself feel safe. So if you feel like you can control everything, then you know that you're safe and everything else is safe too. So what happens in childhood trauma is that the abuse actually affects your development of your identity. And that's why that unresolved trauma can come into play as an adult, because it starts affecting your self-identity, who you are, how you identify with your tribe or your crowd or your caretakers in your community, etc. When you become known as, that person, or known as, oh, the peacekeeper, or, oh, they're always so nice, they'll do anything for you, that type of thing. So sometimes this can cause other issues. Sometimes people are very avoidant of relationships. Sometimes people can be very cold and unemotional, mainly because we aren't used to being allowed to feel emotions. So when we're young and we express an emotion and it's met with rejection or punishment, we learn to not express that emotion anymore. And as an adult, then we become an adult and we avoid relationships, we avoid intimacy, we avoid getting close to people just because that's what feels safe for us. Is to just, I'd rather just be on my own than risk being hurt or harmed by someone. So part of that, part of our own healing is understanding that not every situation is going to be that traumatic, so to speak. We can, in a way, being unemotional is also avoiding yourself. So I'm a big believer that, mind and body speak to each other all the time. And so by numbing yourself out, disassociating, not being emotional, not creating or fostering relationships or intimacy with other people, you're also, in a way, you're avoiding yourself too, because you don't feel comfortable being yourself. So, another thing to think about. Sometimes we get attracted to destructive relationships. So sometimes we've talked in the previous couple of times, couple meetings and videos about samskaras and how in Hinduism and in yoga and in India, they believe that energy, so an event happens and the energy of that event gets infused. And so we hold on to it so tightly. So what happens to energy that's not allowed to expand? We keep it really tight. So what happens is it starts to circle, just like an atom, just like, water circles down the drain. So just like an atoms create an orbit or planets create an orbit, that energy sort of creates an orbit. So it just starts to spiral and it gets really tightly held there until we have a trigger, whether that is a smell or a taste or a feeling or a sensation or a thought, or we see something that triggers anything along those lines, will kind of re-agitate or irritate that samskara, that stored energy, and allow it to kind of expand. And that's why we talk about, like, when you feel an emotion, to not shut it down, to go ahead and feel it, whatever that is for you, whether you're going to cry or whether you're going to scream or whether you're going to throw things or break something. As long as you can fully feel that emotion and express it, then it will kind of dissipate and go away. It's been processed. As long as you can safely process your emotions, and if you feel like you can't do that on your own, then obviously, go talk to a therapist or get into some type of therapy support system when it comes to that, so that you can do that with a professional and do that safely. So what happens is we get this samskara. So we have this energy of this destructive relationship from a caregiver or parent or loved one or whomever it was that traumatized us. So we have this stored energy because, it's so difficult and painful. We don't want to, we're not ready to get into the feeling part of it, to let it go yet. So we create another situation. And like we've mentioned before, we sort of recreate situations once we leave them. If we haven't resolved the issue or learned the lesson, we will recreate it so that we can get a better control on it, so to speak, and sort of live it out that way. And the same thing with the samskara. So sometimes we jump into relationships with people that we think we know who they are, or we get involved in a business project with someone, a partner, we think we know who they are. And then something happens and you're like, oh, that's just like so-and-so who was very abusive or who traumatized me or something along those lines. And it's just your subconscious way of trying to resolve that and play that out. So we weren't able to resolve that and play that out as children. So sometimes we do that as adults because we feel like now we have the emotional maturity, the emotional capacity, hopefully most of us, to sort of have a little bit better handle, a better response to it, and understand how to let that go, so to speak. We try and fix the trauma, if you will. Some of us have difficulty with emotions, showing emotion in relationships. I myself have been very guilty of this. For me, it was just easier to just not. I'd rather just be, just plain no emotion. I remember that like crying was not a thing for me. So I was actually reading on what crying was, how people got crying stimulated, because it was just so not a part of my life. So I had to learn how to do that, which sounds so silly, but it's a very real thing for people that have endured abuse sometimes. So not uncommon. We start to alter our attachment styles. So most therapists will tell you that a healthy, secure attachment in childhood is, the child who's loved and encouraged and praised, that has good, healthy boundaries, that feels safe, feels secure, those types of things. And so what can happen is we start to alter how we allow ourselves to attach to other people as an adult. because of this unresolved trauma from our childhood. So if you have endured abuse or neglect as a child, or a lot of rejection from caregivers as a child, sometimes, or a trauma from your caregivers as a child, whatever that abuse looks like in any way, shape, or form, what can happen is that you will start to subconsciously, you won't be able to form healthy attachments to other people in your life, whether that's family or friends or significant others, or jobs or whatever that is. It won't be easy for you. We start, we have a fear of abandonment. So it's the fear of loss or rejection again. So sometimes people get really cold, and sometimes people get really clingy and codependent. We have a fear of being unlovable, which is another thing, which is like where we are always feeling shame or guilt in a relationship. Or we are people pleasers, like the mediators. Let me just make everybody okay and everything okay so that I can feel safe. You think that oh, I just want to make sure everybody else is okay. Well, that's great, but are you okay? Because if you're coming from a desire that you need everyone else to feel okay for you to feel safe and okay, that's really not healthy. So it's not about making other people do that for you. So, and like I mentioned, dependency and codependency can be issues as well. We can become so dependent on someone, such as a significant other or partner, we can drive them away, or we become codependent, meaning that we sort of need the drama to sort of fix the trauma, and it's this weird back and forth game. Um, Sometimes we can become, when we're really cold and unemotional, we have we get very entitled. I've been through so much. No one's going to tell me anything, and I'm going to do it my way, and that's the way it is. I'm totally independent. I don't need anyone at any time for anything ever. We become very inflexible. We have unrealistic expectations of other people, and because that stems from unrealistic expectations of ourselves. So a little self-reflection there. Sometimes we will emotionally pull away. This is part of that disassociation. When we start to feel something good, we're like, oh, we're so used to bad things happening that when we feel something good, we're like, oh, well, it's just a matter of time before something bad happens. So we'll start to emotionally pull away a little bit. And that's another way that you can see that your trauma is not resolved. It becomes almost like a threat to our independence. So needing people. We can fear intimacy, we can have trust issues. And then here's a really big one too, is that sometimes we are very uncomfortable when our partner shows emotion. And not just our partner, but like a boss, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, whomever that is. We become very uncomfortable when someone else shows a strong emotion. Number one, if we're not used to being emotional or showing emotion, that's kind of a scary thing for us. It's a foreign concept. And number two, the other thing is, we've seen those emotions of anger or sadness in caregivers before, or people that have traumatized us before. And that's really uncomfortable. It takes us right back to that place again. And it's really, really hard for us to handle. So we become very uncomfortable with that. So, what are some things that we can do? So, I will say if you are in a relationship with someone and they aren't aware of your trauma, please make them aware in some way, shape, or form. They don't have to know gory details. They don't have to know the extent of it or who it was or anything like that. You can just say, hey, I'm working on some things, some unresolved things from my childhood that have come to my attention, and I want to work on that, because that's the goal, is to better yourself. So I do want to touch on making sure that your partner knows something of that sort if you're in a relationship with someone, and maybe not on a first date, but making sure that they understand that, you're working on things. And just because you're working on things, maybe you're a little off in certain areas sometimes, but that's okay, because that's where you are in your journey. You don't need to explain that to anyone or rationalize that or anything of that nature. But maybe if this is a long-term relationship or a serious committed relationship, maybe suggest that they go see a therapist with you or on their own, so that they can get a better understanding of where you're coming from. Because as people that are traumatized, it's hard for us to have a good support system. So we get these heightened reactions. We get these really emotionally fueled disagreements and things. We withdraw or we attack. I mean, we can go both ends of the spectrum here. It's really hard for us to accept love. It's really hard for us when people totally accept us just as we are. That's hard for us to deal with. Sometimes we have the trust issues, like I said. We worry about a partner's faithfulness or things, especially if we saw that as a child with our parents. Um, or we have an aversion to talk about things. Like I said, maybe that's part of the aversion is they don't have to know everything, and it's probably not in their best interest to share the trauma, so to speak. But it's important to just let them know that I'm working on something here. That's all you need to say. But I will say this, especially if it is a serious relationship, a lot of people ask me about flashbacks or like night terrors where you wake up and you're kind of like you're in that situation. You wake up and it's like so really you're like in cold sweat or you're like trembling or shaking. One thing that is helpful is if you have a glass of water nearby, or if the person can offer you a glass of water. What that does is that stimulates your salivary glands, which have uh, a direct connection with your prefrontal cortex. So, and what that does is it helps regulate your emotion and remind you, oh, I'm here now and I'm safe, and I don't need to go back to that situation again. That didn't. I'm fine with that. So sometimes it's hard for us to relate to other people. And again, you can read on your own about attachment disorders. There's like dismissive avoidant, which is when you get rejected a lot by your caregiver and you can overly emphasize your independence. So you have all this rejection. So as an adult, you're like, I don't need anybody. I'm good. The other one is the fearful avoidant attachment. And if you're exposed to like long-term abuse or neglect, you may fear intimacy and have a real tough time showing emotion and trust in a close relationship with people. And then there's the anxious, preoccupied attachment. And these are kids who got like loving mom and dad or caregiver, and then like really angry, abusive. So the message was really inconsistent with you. So they went from both ends of the spectrum, or like they would encourage your art, to draw a picture, and then they would just do nothing but criticize it and bash it. So it's this really confusing messages as a child. And sometimes those type of attachments, the anxious preoccupied, can be described as codependent or clingy or needy, things like that. So just wanted to let you know about that. Does anyone have any questions about anything? I'm not seeing any specific questions. So no, it says someone's typing. Well, we'll see. But anyway, those are a few ways that unresolved trauma can affect our adult relationships. So just keep those things in mind in your everyday life. When people say, oh, you're hard to talk to, or I can't connect with you, or you feel that you can't connect with other people, that's another thing is a lot of times we feel as people who have survived trauma that we don't have anything in common with other people and we can't really relate to them. And on some level, that's true, but on a whole other level, that's not true. And you can. You just have to find ways to do that, whether it's through one thing or another and not letting it control you. So just because you're traumatized doesn't mean it has to shape the rest of your entire life. And I read a really cool quote today, and I really like this. I use this in my work with addicts a lot. And let's see if I can find it here real quick on my phone. I'm sorry. But it was just really good. It really just struck a nerve with me. Maybe not. Oh, here it is. It says, you're not stuck. You're just committed to certain patterns of behavior because they helped you in the past. Very true with trauma, right? Survival. Now those behaviors have become more harmful than helpful. The reason why you can't move forward is because you keep applying an old formula to a new level in your life. Change the formula to get a different result. Emily Marushan. I'll put it up on the website. Emily Marushan, it looks like is her name. So anyway, very, very true. So we get committed because we get stuck in these behavior types because that's how we survived. That's how we came out alive and okay on the other side. But now it's not working for us as an adult. Now we're having issues. And so now we just need to sort of change that a little bit, just fine tune it, tweak it. It's okay to have that. That's the other thing is, drastic change is great, but it's extremely uncomfortable. And so sometimes just fine tuning or tweaking things a little bit at a time is more than enough. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have questions, please write it on the discussion forum or email me. I'm happy to answer questions, and I look forward to doing our next video next month. And hopefully we'll meet in person next month. I'm trying to get that set up now. So I will let you guys know next week. Hope you have a good night. Thanks for watching.